online conference after quite the hiatus. This year has been particularly rough for activities, particularly extracurricular ones, and especially for MUN. MUN seeks to replicate diplomacy, connectivity between people, and communication. So this pandemic that has stopped human interaction and even conferences happening from all around Brazil has been a serious challenge for MUN. I'm sure all your clubs back at home, and especially ours, have struggled with this pandemic. We've had to reaccommodate this conference not once, but twice. And it has been a logistical nightmare over the past year. And it's undoubtedly true that the pandemic has also affected all of the other MUN conferences throughout Brazil. However, even with this obstacle, I'm extremely happy and proud to announce that BSBMUN 7 will be taking place today. We have 3 different schools from Brazil and delegates from all over the world who are participating in our conference. Thank you so much for your critical support during these difficult times and for always committing to MUN. I'd also like to give a few words about our current situation in what is evolving in a post-pandemic world and diplomacy in this era. BSBMUN 7 is not the only event that is reopening in this post-pandemic system. With vaccinations and awareness about our pandemic reaching all-time highs, we're finally starting to see light at the end of the tunnel. We're finally starting to imagine a world or a year where we don't have to be secluded because of COVID. It's good to see businesses reopen or people begin to exhale, but the pandemic has nonetheless caused critical damage to a lot of things in our society, but particularly, I think, to diplomacy. In this post-pandemic world, the role of MUN, but more fundamentally, the role of communication and diplomacy itself between states, entities, and people has never been more important and never been more hurt. It's not just about the Worldwide Fund making its own events or having to cancel them. It's about restricting the interaction between people and the isolation that has been created because of the pandemic. Even between people, ourselves, this sense of diplomacy has dissipated. So it has become not just a political issue, but a serious social one as well. This problem not only equates into etiquette or formalities, but the relationships between nations and civilizations themselves. Just recently, we saw the total collapse of bilateral relations and peace between 2 European states 2 weeks ago, something which hasn't happened since more than 30 years ago with the collapse of the Berlin Wall. This alarming turn of events is only made worse when one considers that global diplomacy in a post-pandemic world is poor and communication is very little. In a post-pandemic world where economies are restarting their engines and geopolitics is once again moving its pieces on its chessboard, the pivotal role of diplomacy should always be present and should be reignited. For that reason, MUN is very important. To me, it's never really mattered what committee I'm in, what delegation I'm representing, because MUN is not about representing a position, something you enjoy representing or you support personally. It's about understanding diplomacy so well that you can mold yourself to represent any position, any idea, any concept in any situation with anyone. This concept is diplomacy, and this is something that we're lacking in this post-pandemic world. MUN is thus not just an opportunity to experience something different with other people and write it on your CV, but it's an opportunity to also experience diplomacy and to enjoy it. With this isolation and weakening system of multilateral relations between countries and people, and us drifting further and further apart from the 2 superpower blocks of the United States and China, the values of diplomacy, the values of communication, and the relationships that are built through diplomacy should remain at heart. As such, I invite everyone in BSBMUN to participate fully, to take advantage of this conference as a space to both learn and enjoy diplomacy, because our post-pandemic world is seriously trying to silence it. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for participating in our conference and for making this occasion possible. Especially, and in particular, I'd like to thank our tech team and our janitors and cleaners and all the people that take part that aren't always named and aren't always seen in our conferences. They make this conference possible, and their help is indispensable. So thank you very, very much. Finally, I'd like to introduce Carolina Donat, our Undersecretary General, to also inaugurate the conference.
Thank you, Felipe. Good evening, delegates, chairs, and advisors. It is my honor and privilege to serve as the Undersecretary General for the 7th edition of BSBMUN. Through indulging in diplomatic dialogue and advocacy, MUN brings many teachings to all of those involved, from enhancing academic proficiencies to everyday skills, such as speaking in public or simply being more mentally and physically organized. This conference is more than an online get-together of international students motivated by the cultivation of diplomacy and debate. It is a legacy and privilege. Being in a school like EAB that offers students the opportunity and possibility of being a part of this experience is extremely important for our formation as human beings who will eventually learn to act ethically and morally while being a part of a community or society. These are crucial aspects for the formation of a generation with principles, capable of providing change and helping those in need to create a better world for all. Not only does MUN give us the opportunity to grow in our own individuality, it also makes people aware of global critical issues that impact political, social, and economic stability of civilians all over the world. As delegates, the opportunity to represent and advocate for countries who require or provide the required assistance consequent to a real-world crisis is extremely meaningful as you go on to test your own morality and negotiation mastery. MUN is an opportunity of self-reflection, an opportunity to listen and be heard. Here, words have power. I believe we are and will always be in a process of self-improvement. For this reason, I urge all of you to talk. Defend your country, be passionate, and most of all, do not be scared to take risks. Be bold and have convictions in your ideas and propositions. MUN is a great experience, so cherish it and engage in debate as much as you possibly can. Finally, I'd like to deeply thank our COOs, Paola Aranci and Orlando Faria, for their indispensable support in the logistics of this conference, the backbone of BSBMUN. It's been truly delightful working with you. In the name of our Secretariat, we hope this conference will prevail in memory and once again contribute to the dignified communal development and to the individual growth I have mentioned previously. Thank you for your attention and time. We will now proceed to the introduction of committees.
Thank you very much, Carol. We'd like to present our first committee, the Security Council, chaired by Daniel Cavalleiros and Noam Knan, especially during this time of worsening relations between superpower blocs of the United States and China and Russia. This committee is going to tackle a very pivotal issue and a very opportune one, the escalating Russo-Ukrainian crisis. Covering this topic of the Russo-Ukrainian crisis, this committee will take on some of the key security and geopolitical issues of our decade. It's going to be a fascinating committee, and I'm very excited to look forward to their discussions. Round of applause. Next, I'd like to introduce our Political Committee of the United Nations. While the Security Council may talk about the headlines, the issues that are always being talked about at dinner tables and on the news, the Political Committee deals with topics that are more challenging and that at times are often overshadowed by other news. Because of this, I'm also very interested in how they will resolve the Israel-Palestine conflict with emphasis on the Gaza dispute, and I'm looking forward to their own discussions. It will be chaired by Carolina Barroso and Vice Chair Giovanni Lacerda. And finally, I'd also like to introduce our special committee, the 1969 Historical Security Council, which will tackle a fascinating topic, the Vietnam War. Revisiting the classical Cold War conflict will not only shed some light on current issues and relationships between superpowers, but will also deal with the nature of how superpowers involve themselves in conflicts and in wars. It will be a very interesting committee, and I'm happy to announce the 1969 Historical Security Council, chaired by Austin Monestel and Paola Aranci. With that being said, I'd also like to thank and introduce our guest speaker, Fernando Pimentel, who is a diplomat and has very kindly offered to give us his experience and his knowledge to share with us during this conference. In a short video, he will talk about diplomacy, the role of the reopening of the pandemic, and the importance of MUN.
Hello, BSBMUN participants. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Fernando Pimentel, and I'm the director for the Department of International Economic Organizations at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Brazil. I have been asked to talk a little bit about my diplomatic life, and I'll try to do this in a sort of ad hoc way without too much structure, but I'll try to get the main message across. So, I'm a Brazilian from São Paulo. I'm an economist, and I'm also the kid of diplomats, diplomatic kid. This gives me a certain background that explains how I finally joined the diplomatic service in Brazil. As a diplomatic kid, I know some of you might even know or be diplomatic kids yourselves. I experienced it is a challenging but also a very rewarding baggage you acquire as you travel abroad, as you get in touch and you understand better other cultures, you learn languages, and these characteristics, I think, led me to choose my diplomatic career. At the beginning, as I was graduating from the Universidade de São Paulo in economics. I did not want to be a diplomat. I wanted to be, I actually went into work as a banker. But investment banker. But finally, all the baggage you finally acquire, they waited in order for me to make a different choice in life. Who knows what would have happened, right? But I have to say I'm, at this moment in time, very pleased with my career choice. And I think the diplomatic career is a wonderful career and a wonderful vector for anybody to display a huge range of abilities. And the one thing we can say for the diplomatic career is that it's certainly never boring. You are never doing the same thing twice. So, in general terms, after I graduated from Rio Branco, which is the Brazilian Diplomatic Academy, in Brazil, like in many countries, but not all, the only way into the diplomatic career is through an exam. In Brazil is a very hard exam, hard but not impossible. So you start through the exam, gives you, leads you into the Brazilian Diplomatic Academy, which is called Instituto Rio Branco. And from there, after you finish the academy, there's a sort of a graduate level training. You then become a full diplomat. So as I graduated, I began my career on the division of transports, communications, and services. This was an economic division. I dealt with several subjects from the start. The level of responsibility a young diplomat gets is quite high, so it's something that's quite rewarding, even at the beginning, because many subjects are so technical, so specialized, that you and a few of your colleagues, maybe your boss, immediate boss, you basically are the ones who actually know what there is to know, the specifics about a certain subject. In my case, for instance, I was negotiating services at the WTO and also the Mercosur at the time. and services negotiations are very complicated services. When you say services negotiations, is like banking services, education services, medical services, professional services in general. They're very complex, and this degree of complexity ends up giving you a lot of say in how Brazilian, in my case, Brazilian policy was shaped in the international arena, even as a very young diplomat. Not only services, I dealt also with maritime services as well, and maritime negotiations. They have their very own. It's possibly one of the ancient, more ancient treaties that the nations have, etc., which are complex for on their own right, and also a very interesting kind of more of a there's a sort of an archaeological aspect to it, where you try to delve into the old agreements your country has signed to understand what exactly are your commitments, what are your rights and obligations. So from the services division, I went to work for then the Brazilian foreign minister. I went to work on his cabinet, and that's one of the aspects of the diversification of our career. I went from negotiating something extremely technical, services, to basically writing speeches and answering press questions and preparing press question answers for the ministerial cabinet. Also very interesting subject, but in which you have to sort of acquire a completely different set of skills, a different attitude, a different language, but also very rewarding. Going on, for just a sidebar here, at least in Brazil, diplomats we have these periods in which we are serving in the capital, and then we go abroad for a certain period, come back, serve in the capital again for a few more years, and go back again, and so on and so forth. So after my time in Brazil, I spent more or less 7 years in Brasilia. I went to my first posting. I served in Washington, again an extremely interesting job and country. Brazil goes without saying. Our embassy in Washington is one of the most, if not the most, important embassies we have. Extremely complex and also rewarding work. There I again changed gears completely, and then I started covering US domestic politics, trying to understand better the views of different politicians, dealing not so much with the executive branch, but more with Congress, and following elections and important resolutions. Very interesting, and it gave me sort of an insight into a very important country's way of thinking and doing things that has served me well for my whole career. Even in the embassy, I then sort of changed job descriptions to try to follow more US foreign policy in Latin America. Eventually, after a period of 3 years, countries differ, but Brazilian diplomats usually spend tours of 3 years per country, which can be, as I said, challenging, especially for the family and the kids. But I'll talk about this a little bit later towards the end, if I have the time. I went from the US to India with in which I had again handled very different issues. I dealt with export promotion and consulate services. The consulate aspect of being a diplomat is a very specialized one and an extremely important one. It's basically when a Brazilian citizen or citizen from any country thinks and interacts with a diplomat is usually through the diplomatic consular services. It is an extremely important service we can render to Brazilian nationals abroad, and it deals with a huge, gamut of subjects from visiting and making sure that Brazilian people detained by the other country's justice system are being fairly treated, etc., to promoting integration and skills and providing documentation for Brazilian citizens who are abroad and require the consular services to do anything, to get documents, to make their own taxes, to get a birth certificate for their kids. So it was a very interesting time in my career in which I really dealt with the public, which is not something that diplomats usually do unless they are in the consular service. Going from the U.S. embassy to Indian embassy, there's one characteristic, at least in the Brazilian foreign service. I know that some other foreign services have much bigger embassies, but the Brazilian embassies in general are relatively small. And in India, a Brazilian diplomat has to take care of more than one aspect. So, as I said, it was export promotion, also consular services, but also technology cooperation, which in the case of India was extremely rewarding. Both our countries have strengths in technology from side to side and have similar challenges, which makes cooperation between developing countries a very rewarding subject. Going from India, I left after, in this case, 2.5 years, to Paraguay. Paraguay is, as everybody knows, a Brazilian neighbor. We have extremely dense relations with our neighbors, especially with Paraguay. And in Paraguay again, I was following mostly domestic politics. But the proximity between Paraguay and Brazil in some levels makes makes a distinction between the domestic politics and international foreign policy kind of blurred. It's not such a clear line, and it was a very rich period. By then, I had already my 3 kids. My 3 kids were born. Each kid was born in a different country. There was one born in the United States, the other one in India, the last one in Paraguay. And one of the challenges that a diplomat will have is to balance his professional and his family life. Of course, this is important in every career, but I would say that for a diplomat, it is especially challenging and important. Usually, especially because we move so much. At least in Brazil, every 3 years, 2 years and a half, we are changing countries in many ways, changing education systems, and the family bears the brunt of it. It's easier for the of all the members of the family. The diplomat himself or herself, they get it easiest. The spouse and the kids have to do the brunt of the adjusting, because for the diplomat it's the work. You have your office and more or less the work. For the spouse, it's all the challenges of changing work, trying to keep up with professional career. It's not even all the time possible, depending on the country. So it is a challenging aspect. But anyway, I have been blessed with 3 wonderful kids and an even more wonderful wife that have, kept the saying that, when they're going to get stuff, the tough gets going. And really, without them, it would have been impossible to, thrive and endure in this years, especially years abroad. So coming back from Paraguay, I came back to Brazil for another tour, more or less 5 years. And at this time in Brazil, I was on lease working for the Brazilian Ministry of Finance. And it was also a very interesting time in my professional career. I was a diplomat dealing with the international aspects of finance. It was the 2008-2009 crisis, and I was working with the G20. And at the time, it was one of those times where you see usually diplomatic career. It's slow moving. Sometimes you negotiate agreements for years, and they only take effect, even after you left the country or is doing something else. But during the crisis, especially working for the G20, which was the sort of the international grouping that was tasked with trying to find international negotiated solutions to the crisis, the financial crisis. It was a very, very rewarding period. It was a time in which you helped negotiate communiques and arrange solutions amongst some of the most influential countries in the world that will have a repercussion in your economy and in the global economy the next day. The G20 communiques, especially at the time, we were very aware that our communiques, our words, the way we addressed things would probably have an effect on stock markets and economic views the next day. It was an extremely, the workload was Herculean at points, but an extremely, possibly the most rewarding period of my professional life, I would say, but not because of the work itself, but because of the circumstances. The world was in a crisis, and you were dealing with subjects that spoke to the heart of the crisis, trying to find common ground with very important partners in a way that will make a difference. I like to say that many important things were done at the time between financial ministers or between also other groups. It was a time where the BRICS in Brazil, BRICS is the group, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, which came into the international arena as a grouping, and the ministries of finance of these countries had a lot of interaction as well. So it was the G20, it was the BRICS, it was creating the BRICS Bank, in which I actually had to use a little bit of my background as in my first job as an investment banker to try to help understand how to proceed. Just another sidebar. I am an economist, but it is for me very clear that in Brazil legally you can be anything. You can, as long as you pass the entry exam, you don't have a specific qualifications. I would say that most diplomats are lawyers in Brazil, followed maybe by economists. But any professional background can join, and I have seen a very interesting, very creative contributions from diplomats who are doctors, engineers. It's clearly a profession in which diversity, not only of background, of course, but of cultures and gender, can contribute a lot. It's for me, it's invariably clear how different people can contribute to a solution, especially when your job is sitting beside or in front of your partner from another country and try to find common ground. I would say that one of the most important things you have to do as a diplomat is not only to make your view prevail. It's to understand what your partner needs or wants. And I think from there, if you get that, you get a very important first step in order to reach a solution, a conclusion. That's something that, it was very rewarding after, you work in a group such as the G20. Also, it's wonderful the friendships you make under these negotiations and conditions. So finally, from my tour in Brazil, working with the G20, I went to Geneva I was the minister counselor. Minister counselor is basically the second posting under the ambassador. Sometimes there are more than one minister counselors at the WTO, the World Trade Organization. Also multilateral organization. Again, a different job. It was my first multilateral experience. Also very interesting. Some diplomats specialize in multilateral negotiations, either economic or the UN, but it was not my case. But it was also very interesting when I got the chance to do that. And from Geneva, I went back to the United States, sort of almost full circle, as Minister Counselor, and eventually DCM at the Brazilian Embassy in Washington. And also an interesting thing to say that the difference between your jobs as a diplomat when you begin, in which way you have a laser-like focus on some subjects and really become an expert, or as much of an expert as you can in specific subjects. And as you rise in the hierarchy, how your job changes. And my job as a minister counselor at our embassy in Washington was very different from my job as a third or second secretary at the same embassy. So finally, coming from Washington, I came back to Brazil. Again, a new tour. In this tour, as I said, I'm the director of International Economic Organizations, which is the sector from our foreign ministry that, as the name implies, deals with the WTO, but other important economic organizations, the OECD as well. And during this time, you have different responsibilities supervising the work and receiving the input from your embassies and delegations all over the world, specialized in economic affairs, of course. So to wrap up, my career as a diplomat has been very diversified. I started, in dealing with economic subjects, but very quickly turned out that I was dealing with either making speeches or following more the political side of things for a while. In India, I even did a stint with consular jobs, technology corporation jobs, and finally, during, I would say, the last 15 years of my career, I have again sort of mainstreamed as an economic diplomat. That's something that also sometimes happens. Not all diplomats need to specialize or have to. As you have seen, it's a very career with many different opportunities. But that's what happened to me. I hope this was not too boring, and I had to share my experiences. As a final message, I would like to say that, especially the Brazilian kids, the diplomatic career is extremely rewarding. It is challenging, but it's the sort of challenge. It's the sort of climb you want to make. If you know, and if you're blessed enough to find a way to balance your professional and your personal life or family life, take care of separating things. I think any young diplomat can be very happy in the profession, and can really contribute to the development and improvement of Brazil. It is extremely gratifying when you realize and you see that what you do as a public servant actually reverberates, feeds back as benefits, as even if it's a tiny contribution to the Brazilian people and to Brazilian society. I'm proud to be a Brazilian diplomat. I'm very glad for the opportunities I had professionally in life. I'm very glad for the company of my colleagues, and extremely grateful for the support of my family, who have been with me throughout this journey so far, and I hope until I'm really old and retired. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you and sharing my experience. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pimentel, for sharing your enriching experiences in the diplomatic field, and for always showing us the value that diplomacy has, particularly in this post-pandemic time. Finally, I'd like to conclude our opening ceremony with a couple of announcements. Firstly, delegates and chairs, you can find all the information, study guides, position papers, deadlines, and especially the Zoom link to your committees on the Google Classrooms that you will have joined or should have joined by now. So please find all information there. Additionally, the schedule is also located on our website. So if you want to look at our schedule, please find that on BSBMUN.com, where you can go to resources and you can find our schedule. And with that, I'm very excited, chairs, delegates, leadership, faculty, to announce, inaugurate, and open BSBMUN 7. And so, as Secretary General, I hereby declare BSBMUN 7 to be in session.